If you've been trying to lose weight by cutting your calories but have only been disappointed by the results, then this video is for you. Here's what you can expect to learn today. First, we're going to cover the problem with calorie counting, followed by the complexity of fat loss and why, yes, the energy in, energy out equation is correct, but more complicated than you think. Then we're going to talk about the body's 4 defense mechanisms against caloric deficits that it perceives to be too drastic. After that, understanding a caloric deficit and how to monitor and adjust the right amount of calories that you should be dropping. Before we jump into it, who am I? My name is Igor. I'm the author of a book called Stop Exercising the Way You Are Doing It Now, as well as others. I'm also a wellness presenter, having done over 400 presentations for some of Canada's largest corporations, including the Royal Bank of Canada, CIBC, Qualcomm, IBM, American Express, and others. I've been a personal trainer since 2006, and I currently run one of the world's premier in-person and virtual personal training companies called FitnessSolutionsPlus. If you want to watch more videos about fat loss, caloric deficits, exercise, nutrition, just subscribe to my channel and you'll be notified when I publish more videos. So lots of people try to lose weight and they earnestly put in a good effort to reduce their calories. And what happens is they know that 3,500 calories is equal to 1 pound of fat, and that is indeed correct. So in theory, if you just reduce your calories by 500, then you lose 1 pound per week. It's a simple balance sheet, isn't it? But if you ever try to do that, it's not quite that simple. The truth is that, in fact, fat loss is more complex than that, and it's a dynamic formula. You can't just affect the energy inside of the equation without affecting the energy outside of the equation. And there are 4 sources of the energy out. Those are called your total daily energy expenditure. And here are the 4 components of that. And we're going to talk about what they are in more detail in the next few slides. So first, there's something called BMR, or your basal metabolic rate. Next is TEF, or thermic effect of food. After that, there is NEAT, N-E-A-T, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And there's the most obvious one, which is just exercise. So let's break them down. BMR is, again, your basal metabolic rate, or how many calories do you burn just to stay alive. A common name for them is coma calories. If you're in a coma, how much energy or calories would it take to keep you alive? How much energy does it take to keep your heart beating, your liver functioning, the blood flowing, your brain working, and so on? About 2/3 of metabolism is simply keeping your body temperature between 36.5 and 36.8 degrees Celsius. For every degree that you're below that, you're burning between 10 and 13% calories pure. So that is BMR. The next component is NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is all physical activity that is not deliberate exercise. In other words, one example is walking to work. This is not a deliberate attempt to improve your endurance or strength or flexibility. It's just your method of transportation from work to home or home to work. Same thing with gardening. It might be healthy, it might be beneficial, but it is not exercise. It's not a deliberate attempt to improve endurance, strength, and so on. And another component is called TEF, or thermic effect of food. That is, whenever we eat food, we don't absorb 100% of the calories. Rather, we absorb about 10% of the calories. Absorb about 90% of the calories and use 10% of the calories for the process of digestion. So, for example, if you eat 2,500 calories per day, you're using 250 of those calories to process the food that you just ate. So let's hypothetically say that you are currently balanced. You're not losing weight, you're not gaining weight. So you're taking in 2,000 calories and you're losing 2,000 calories. So we subtract 500 calories, expecting a 1 pound deficit, and to be at a baseline of 1,500. And so what happens after that? If the body thinks that you are trying to take away its food, is going to fight back, okay? And how does it fight back? There are a number of different ways, and here are 4. One of the ways in which it fights back is it reduces your body temperature. As we mentioned earlier, 2/3 of your metabolism is just to maintain your body temperature where it is, that 36.5 to 36.8 degrees Celsius. And for every degree you're below that, you're burning about 10 to 13% fewer calories than that. Another way in which your body compensates or fights back against excessive caloric cuts is you become more sluggish. So you either exercise less, or you put in less effort into your workouts, or you skip workouts, and so on. Another compensation is that you do less involuntary activity. You fidget less. Some people just sit there and they bounce their ankle. Some people click their pen. Some people twirl their hair. And all these things, while not being formal exercise, they do burn hundreds of calories per day. And they're all subconscious, they're largely involuntary. And yet, all these involuntary activities start to decrease as the caloric deficits become larger and larger. And another way which the body fights back against drastic caloric cuts is just increasing your cravings. Some people have a condition that prevents them from going on a diet. It's called getting hungry. And it happens to all of us if the caloric cuts are too drastic. So what happens when we decline calories? Well, what happens is exercise, the amount of calories you burn through exercise stays the same regardless of how many calories you're taking in. Your metabolism, contrary to popular belief, stays the same. The amount of calories you burn from food, your thermic effect of food, stays the same. But what drops is your NEAT, okay? All that involuntary activity, that's largely where it comes from. And so let's hypothetically say that you were, before you had a caloric deficit, you were burning 600 calories per day. You decide to go on a deficit and you don't know that that deficit is excessive. Now, instead of burning 600 calories per day, you're burning 300 calories per day fewer as a result of just not bouncing your ankle as much, not twirling your hair, not being as fidgety in general. So you're burning 300 calories that you never counted for. And what happens after that? Well, you drop your calories by 500, but your calories out also drop by 300. You think you have a 500 calorie deficit, but you actually have only a 200 calorie deficit. So what happens 1 week later? You're very frustrated that your fat loss efforts didn't work. You expect to see a 1 pound drop, but instead you see nothing, because across a 1 week span, a 200 calorie deficit is just 1,400 calories. That's not a lot. And so after doing this for a few weeks in a row, you conclude that my metabolism is broken, or it's my hormones, or calorie counting doesn't work, or calories aren't even real, none of which is true. It's not your metabolism, it's not your hormones, and calorie counting does work. You just did it incorrectly because you didn't know any better. Here's how it works in practice, okay? So there is a large person-to-person variation in terms of how hard and how much the body compensates for caloric drops. And again, it largely depends on how big is the drop. The bigger the drop, the greater the compensation. Here's one scenario. Let's say that you drop your calories by 500 and calorie burning stays the same. This is a perfect balance sheet, okay? Your expenditure stays the same, your intake drops, perfect. You lose the expected 1 pound per week. And this is a small minority of people. Scenario number 2, here is what can happen. You reduce your calories by 500, but your calorie burning also drops by 200 or 300. That deficit that you thought was 500 calories is not. It's only a 200 or 300 calorie deficit, so you lose less than 1 pound per week. Scenario number 3. One thing that can happen is your calories drop and calorie burning also drops by 500. So you think you're at a deficit, but you're actually at maintenance. And so there's no change in your weight. You're just hungrier, you're more irritable, and you're very, very upset that nothing's happening and frustrated to boot. Scenario number 4. This happens to a very small minority of people, but here's what happens. This person can drop their calories by 500, and they feel so good, so energetic that their calorie burning actually increases. And as a result, their weight drops by more than 1 pound per week. This is the person going around and telling everybody about how good their diet is. Now, this typically only happens to people who are eating a large number of calories per day to begin with, like 4,000, 4,500 and higher, because for them, 500 calories is only about 12.5% or less. For somebody who was eating only 2,000 calories per day, 500 represents 25%. So this is the person for whom the body is going to compensate very, very hard. And again, where do the drops in calorie expenditure come from? Largely, it is not metabolism. Here's a study titled "Chronic Dieting Does Not Result in Sustained Reduction in Basal Metabolic Rate in Overweight Women." And by the way, the same is true for men. The conclusion was that metabolism is predicted by body weight. Drops in calorie burning by and large come from NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, not your metabolism. There is nothing wrong with your metabolism by and large. unless there is a thyroid issue like hypothyroidism or some other kind of issue that prevents your metabolism from being where it should be. Largely, your metabolism person to person is unvaried. It's in great part due to NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And so what should be your caloric deficit? What is an appropriate caloric deficit? Conceptually, it is a caloric deficit that the body doesn't fight against. In other words, I can't say that a 500 calorie deficit is the perfect one, because somebody who eats 2,000 calories is going to be 500 is going to be a much larger number for them than it will be for somebody who eats 4,000. So conceptually, it is a caloric deficit that the body doesn't fight against. And how do you figure that out? Well, here's a very practical way. You take your body weight in pounds and you multiply that by 15. And that's going to be the amount of calories you're currently eating if you're maintaining your weight, okay? Assuming you don't exercise. It's even higher if you exercise. But let's use an example of no exercise for the sake of simplicity. Let's say your body weight is 200 pounds. You multiply 200 by 15 and you get 3,000 calories per day. If you're not exercising and your weight is currently at maintenance, you're not gaining, you're not losing, you're eating 3,000 calories per day. I don't care what your nutrition tracking app tells you, that's not a correct app, and they're often wrong by 30 or 40%. So you're currently eating 3,000 calories per day. You subtract 10% from that to arrive at a deficit of 300 calories. And what happens after that? Well, you measure your weight not every week, but every 2 weeks. And better yet, if you measure your body fat instead of just your weight. If your weight dropped less than you thought, perhaps your caloric deficit is too drastic. We should reduce your deficit from 10% to 9 or 8%. And that's a very simple but very practical way of finding the appropriate caloric deficit. If you like this video, click like and subscribe.